Good morning, everybody. As Martin said, my name is Sinead and I've worked with CNC for over 20 years, and for most of that time I've been working in the area of innovation, product development, packaging development and process development. And I've worked on brands such as Tullamore Dew, Bulmers Berry, Bulmers Hair and various soft drinks. So I've worked in lots of different product categories. And I'm delighted to have an opportunity this morning to talk to you about a very successful collaborative project in the area of process development between Bulmers Ireland Limited and CNC. And while the project was run in 2000 and between 2000 and 2004, the results of that project played a very important role in the design and development of the cider making process in Bulmers Ireland Limited in Clonmel. So I suppose the first thing I'd like to say to you is, unfortunately, I have to leave shortly after my presentation. So if anybody's got any questions, maybe if you'd like to sort of get them ready for me just at the end of the presentation, and I'll take them then. So in terms of the presentation, I'm just going to take you through the background, how the project came about, why did we collaborate rather than do the work ourselves, the Applied Research Grant Scheme, which is what the scheme was called at the time, key achievements, key learnings, and I'll take your questions then. So in terms of the background, Bulmers' traditional cider making process, if I take you back to 1999, all of the cider that we produced was actually produced through the traditional cider making process, and that means we press the apples and the juice then was pumped into the traditional, or the wooden vats, as you see, which everybody's very familiar with. And just interesting, what a lot of people may not be aware is that those fermentations are natural fermentations. We didn't actually add any yeast strains. The yeast were actually naturally indigenous in the process itself. And by 1999, we'd only ever identified those strains at species level because we only had the capability to do that. And in terms of strains, we didn't know how many, we didn't know which were the most important, and we didn't know what role they played in terms of fermentation dynamics. And somebody asked the question in 1999, in the event of a catastrophic failure in the cider house, how would you replicate the unique flavour of Bulmers cider without the traditional process? And the answer to that question was we couldn't. So very quickly we decided that we need to map the process and identify those strains so that we can replicate the flavour and the process in another location. So we started off, we tried to do it ourselves. We engaged the services of Professor Bob Davenport, who was an expert mycologist, and he had developed very sophisticated forensic microbiological techniques to try and identify strains. But unfortunately, we soon discovered that to profile one fermentation, it took 2 people 3 months to actually do the profiling. So unfortunately, we were going nowhere fast at that point. So the other issue was that only certain strains could be identified using that method, and sometimes the results were inconsistent. So we made a decision that we needed to map the process using molecular analysis. And when I say molecular analysis, that's DNA fingerprinting, similar to the type of analysis that you use in fraternity testing. So, but we had to do it in a cost-effective manner. It was very expensive. When we went to look at it outside, it was very expensive. And also we needed to do it in a timely manner. And the other thing is that we needed to make sure that we achieved the original objective, and that was to replicate the flavour and the process for Bulmers cider. So we spoke to Enterprise Ireland at the time, which were very helpful, and we also spoke to UCC. And Enterprise Ireland offered us funding to run an applied research grant scheme with UCC. And we chose UCC because we were aware of the expertise they had in that area, and also the location was ideal because we were going to have to be shipping samples up and down on an almost daily basis. And this allowed us to sponsor a PhD project with one of our technologists. And I suppose what was very important for us was it also allowed a high level of integration between the team in Bulmers and also the research project that was going on in UCC. And if you think about this was the easy bit for the team in Clonmel was the identification of the strain. We then had to take those strains and we had to ferment them individually. We had to work out how well they were able to ferment, how they were able to interact with other strains, and also the flavour profile that they could develop. We quarterly reviews with the UCC just to make sure that the project was on track. And also, which is very important, is it led to further collaboration with other universities in Europe, because cider making is very close to wine making. So there was a university in Spain which had done a lot of work on a similar type of exercise, mapping the winemaking process. So in terms of achievements, I suppose for the first time in the history of traditional cider making, Bulmers Ireland actually mapped the process and the microflora of their traditional process. And in addition, we transferred the technology that was developed at UCC to Bulmers, and that didn't happen at the end of the project. That actually happened, right throughout the project as different techniques were being developed, because as you can imagine, the process was actually quite slow. So one of the key objectives was to come up with rapid techniques to quickly identify the strains. In terms of commercial success, we achieved ultimately what we set out to achieve, and we were able to replicate that traditional process. Dr. Bill Morrissey achieved his PhD. UCC also enhanced their academic expertise in molecular analysis. And for everybody involved in the project, we all built very strong relationships with a lot of experts around Europe. Like with everything, there were some learnings as well from the process. At the time, with the Applied Research Grant Scheme, IP ownership was not part of the agreement up front. So, as you can imagine, it's always more difficult to agree IP at the end of the project. Now, that's no longer an issue because with any collaborative project with Enterprise Ireland, IP ownership is something that's always agreed at the start. Alignment of objectives is also very important, because, as you can imagine, with any, commercial enterprise, we had very clear objectives in terms of what we wanted to achieve in terms of the timeline. And you can imagine then in a university, it's quite easy for a project, an academic project, to sort of go off on a different tangent. Now, I'm happy to say that didn't happen in our case, but you could see how easily it could happen. So it's very important to keep very close to your partners and just make sure that everybody's objectives are on track. Another learning for us was publication of results and findings, and again, we probably weren't as clear as we should have been in terms of what bits of information we wanted to keep confidential. I suppose that was really our responsibility. It wasn't a major issue, but again, it's just something to flag and to be very, very aware of, that it's very important to be very clear in exactly what the company wants from the partnership. So all in all, the collaborative project was very successful. I'd like to acknowledge as well the work that UCC, the contribution that UCC made, and also Enterprise Ireland. Enterprise Ireland have been supporting CNC for many, many years, and I'd like to acknowledge that today. So if anybody's got any questions, please feel free to ask. That's the end of my presentation.
Sinead, how has the process changed now then within the cider making as a result of this?
As a result of this, well, I suppose rather than relying on the traditional cider making process, which was uncontrolled, what we were able to do was a very good question. What we did was we identified the best strains, the best process conditions, and the best fermentation dynamics, and we were able to replicate that in a more modern process and in a controlled way. So we were able to. So as you can imagine, in a controlled process, you're going to have quite a degree of variability. You're going to have some very good fermentations, some mediocre, maybe some not so good. And what we were able to do is to replicate consistently the very best fermentations, because the process of mapping the cider making process happened between 1999 and 2005. So we spent a long time mapping the process. So we now are at a point where we can actually replicate the process very consistently and the very best of those fermentations.
So are you doing that?
Yes, we're doing that, yes. Yeah, absolutely, yes. I mean, commercially, it's been a huge success. Yeah. Yes?
I wonder, could you perhaps comment on what percentage of the overall cost of this program that Bulmers underwrote, without revealing how much it cost?
What percentage? I mean, it would have been probably less than 1%, I would imagine.
So most of it was actually supported by grants?
Most was for, well, it was 25% funded by Enterprise Ireland. So I'm not sure if I understand your question.
What I was attempting to get at is how much cash had the beneficiary to put into the process, not in absolute terms, in percentage terms.
I suppose it's difficult to put a figure or to put a percentage on that. I suppose in terms of, I'm not so sure, Dennis, if you can answer, because Dennis would have been our technical director at the time, it would have been, I suppose, the overall cost of the project, I suppose, was, for us, it was a significant investment at the time. But I suppose in the overall, in terms of your overall revenue, it would have been probably a relatively small percentage. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking.
It's not, and perhaps I'm doing a bad job, and I apologise for it. What I really, this was a programme that had a certain cost, some of which, of course, was your own staff time.
Yes.
And I'm just interested in what percentage of the overall cost of the programme would have been covered by the company that benefited at the end, and how much it would have come from grants, or perhaps by support from UCC.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I think as the project, from the time it commenced, say in 99, 2000, we were right through, at the early stages, there would have been a higher amount being committed, say, through what would now be an innovation partnership with the Applied Research Grant at the time. And so it might be 75% in the early years coming from that. But as time went on and as we began to get nearer to commercialization, it changed. So at the very end, we were then committing huge resources in terms of people, trials, in-house, etc. So as we translated the technology in-house, it reversed, and probably at the end we were carrying all the costs. So I think where the benefit came through was the money, the support that came through the Applied Research Grant to support the person doing the PhD, that was really largely coming from the Enterprise Ireland side. What we were supplying then was if you wish, the development and the application of that. So over the whole project, we probably worked out 50-50 or maybe a bit more on our side.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Yes.
Excuse me. The doctoral student, does he run your own vehicle? Was he?
Yes, he was. He actually started with us on a TechStart programme in 1999. So when, I suppose, at the point where we wanted to start mapping the process in more detail, we had got some funding for him on a TechStart programme, and then he was the natural choice for us then to do the PhD project. Yes.
Good morning, my name is Colin Rochford. My business is called Power Savvy. We help residential customers tackle rising electricity costs. But what I'm interested in is, you said the UCC suited you because of geographic location, but was that the only criteria, or did you do a tendering process, or how did you actually pick the partner?
I suppose we didn't do a tendering process. We were aware of the expertise within UCC, and I suppose we because of the location, they're one of the first universities we spoke to. We could have done the project in other universities. I mean, we looked at Queen's University as well, but it just, UCC had the expertise that we required, and it just, fortunately, another bonus is the logistics, because remember we were shipping samples on an almost daily basis, which would have been very difficult if we'd done it with Queen's or one of the universities in Dublin. Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about the potential conflicts between navigating IP rights and commercial confidentiality, and what the outcome was?
Well, I suppose, because we had left it till the end of the project, there was, I suppose, an element of there was negotiation at the end, really. And I suppose that took sort of a number of months to resolve. But, it was resolved, amicably at the end. In terms of IP rights, I mean, we Bulmers would have retained the IP rights in terms of the overall process, as you might imagine. But there was a series of negotiation discussions took place before we finally agreed that. Okay, is that all the questions? So,
What exactly did you patent in the end?
we didn't patent anything in the end. I suppose one of the reasons was because we wanted to keep certain elements of the process confidential. Yes.
Sorry, that's looking back on the process now, given the commercial benefit to Bulmers as a result of this,
Yes.
would you have done anything differently, like the idea of having like one PhD student over 5 years to do this process? Would you have done it differently now, looking back, or done anything differently?
I'm not so sure we would have, because at one point, I mean, a lot of the work was actually done on site. At one point, we had 18 people on site working, feeding into this project, because we had laboratory, we had a lot of the molecular analysis being done on site. We also had pilot plant trials and full-scale commercial trials going on at the same time. So I think, I think the project worked extremely well. And like UCC were actually very efficient in conducting the project as well, and they would have also driven the collaboration with the other university in Spain, because what they did was they were able to fast track some of the analysis that we needed to do. So I think overall the project was hugely successful, and UCC played a very important role in that. Okay, that's all the questions. Thank you very much, everybody.